Welcome to The Deep Dive, brought to you by MW One Stop's Music, Movies, and Sport.
Glad to be here.
Just a quick note before we jump in, the information for this story comes from the internet, and, it may not always be completely accurate.
Right. Always good to keep that in mind.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into a story of, well, truly immense promise that was just tragically cut short. We're talking about Len Bias.
Yeah, it's a powerful one. We've gathered quite a few sources, really trying to piece together his whole journey.
Yeah.
From being this local phenom, then a huge college star, getting drafted, and then the devastating impact of his death.
Exactly. Our goal here is to unpack these sources, pull out the key details, the insights, maybe challenge some things you thought you knew, or just add some perspective. It's not just about the what happened, which was awful, but why? Why does this story still hit so hard, even all these years later?
And we should mention up front, some of the stuff we'll cover, based on the sources, touches on sensitive topics like drug use, government policy
For
responses.
sure.
We're aiming to report impartially on what the sources say, just conveying the facts and ideas presented in them. We're not here to endorse any specific viewpoints within that material.
Got it. Okay, let's get into it. The story starts November 18th, 1963, in Landover, Maryland. That's when Leonard Kevin Bias was born.
He was the second of 4 children, raised in what sounds like a very loving, very religious household by his parents, James and Dr. Lonise Bias.
They really instilled strong values, discipline. Seems like a solid foundation.
Definitely. And it's interesting, off the court, people called him Frosty. Sources say he was actually pretty quiet, maybe even a bit shy, laid back.
Which is such a contrast to the player he became.
Totally. So he goes to Northwestern High School in Hyattsville. Apparently when he started, he was pretty raw. Still needed to grow into that big 6'8" frame. Wasn't super polished yet.
But then under his coach there, Bob Wagner, he just exploded, developed incredibly fast.
Yeah, the sources describe these flashes of brilliance starting to show, that soft touch he had near the rim, but also this incredible leaping ability, just different from other guys. And an aggressive streak started coming out, too.
So by junior year, he wasn't just developing, he was basically taking over Prince George's County basketball.
Right. And that's when the scouts really started paying attention. They saw him as maybe a late bloomer, but someone with a definite NBA ceiling because of that athleticism and size.
And his friends from back then, sources say they described him as really loyal, focused, not someone who got pulled into trouble easily.
Which makes sense, given that background.
Yeah.
So when college recruitment time came, you had all the big programs after him: Georgetown, Syracuse, Virginia, UCLA. The list goes on.
The heavy hitters.
For sure. But he chose to stay close to home, University of Maryland.
Being near family was big. Yeah.
Huge.
Right.
Plus, the ACC was the conference, playing for a legendary coach like Lefty Drysdale. That was appealing. But the sources also mentioned he felt Maryland would give him space to grow, not just as a player, but as a person.
Interesting. So it was a very deliberate choice, tied to his roots.
Seems like it. And that connection to home, it's a thread. When he got to Maryland in '82, he was still that skinny freshman, like we said. Loads of potential, yeah, but stepping into the ACC, that's a whole different level.
It's tough. But watching his development over those 4 years, based on the sources, it's pretty amazing. Freshman year, okay, supporting role. Stats aren't eye-popping, maybe 7 points, 4 boards a game.
Right, but you could see the athleticism, the dunks, the blocks.
Yeah.
You knew something special was there. He was just learning, adapting.
On sophomore year, 83, 84, boom, everything jumps up.
Dramatically. He's suddenly averaging over 15 points, more than 6 rebounds. He'd filled out. His game looked smoother, more confident. And Maryland went to the Sweet 16 that year.
Okay, and this is where that legendary matchup happens, right? The ACC tournament duel with Michael Jordan.
Oh, yeah. Even though Maryland lost that game, Bias going head-to-head with Jordan, it was electric. People were already talking like, this is the next great NBA rivalry.
Wow. And then Jordan leaves for the NBA after that year.
Exactly. So junior year, 84, 85, the spotlight is fully on Bias. He's not just a key player anymore. He is the team, the heart and soul, averaging over 18 points, nearly 7 rebounds.
The sources paint him as just a complete nightmare for other teams to handle by then.
Totally. That mid-range jumper got deadly.
Yeah.
He got this incredible spin move. Defenders just couldn't stay in front of him. And he played defense, too, like with real intensity, a two-way force.
And this is the year he leads them to the ACC championship.
Yep. And gets named ACC Player of the Year. The NBA scouts were going crazy. Some sources even say scouts thought his potential, his ceiling, might actually be higher than Jordan's because he had that size and power to go with the skill.
That's incredible praise, which makes his decision after that junior year even more surprising.
Right. He could have easily been a top pick in the '85 draft, but he decides to stay for a senior year.
Why? What were the reasons?
Sources say he wanted his degree, first off. He wanted another shot at a national title with Maryland,
Yeah.
and he wanted to cement his legacy there.
So the 85-86 season becomes like his farewell tour.
And he delivered. Averaged 23.2 points a game, highest in the ACC. Repeats as ACC Player of the Year. Doing that twice in that conference back then. Extremely rare.
And then there's that game, February 20, 1986, Maryland at #1 North Carolina.
Oh, the legend game.
Yeah.
In the Dean Dome. He drops 35 points.
And the dunk.
The dunk, that unbelievable, thunderous dunk in overtime that basically sealed the win against the best team in the country on their court. It was nationally televised.
Everyone saw it.
Everyone saw it. His legend just exploded overnight. Commentators started saying, Jordan with power. Okay, after that, no question, top 2 pick in the draft, guaranteed. Red Auerbach in Boston was locked in.
He saw him as the Celtics' future.
Absolutely. But, the sources also point out this contrast during his Maryland years. Off the court, he's described as enjoying art, sketching. Kept a small circle of friends. Private guy, thoughtful, loyal, even playful.
So it sounds pretty grounded.
Yeah, but there were also these whispers. Maybe oversight within the program wasn't as tight as it could have been. Talk of parties, the temptations that come with that level of fame on campus.
The skipped classes his final semester.
Right. The sources mentioned that specifically suggesting maybe some warning signs were there, that things weren't totally smooth behind the scenes. The pressure cooker environment.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the pressures those young athletes face?
Exactly. And what kind of real support is there when you're suddenly that famous, that valuable, but still just, a kid trying to navigate it all?
A really important question the sources raise. So, okay, that sets the stage for the 1986 NBA draft. Bias is the guy. He's considered the most NBA-ready player. Trained like crazy, apparently.
He was seen as a can't-miss prospect. And the Celtics, talk about timing.
Perfect spot. They had the #2 pick from a trade. They just won the championship. Bird, McHale, Parrish. But they needed that next star.
And Red Auerbach was laser-focused. Bias was his guy, the heir apparent.
And Bias was excited about Boston, too, right? Joining that winning tradition.
Oh, yeah. Sources say he was thrilled. It felt like the perfect fit.
So, draft day, June 17th, 1986, Madison Square Garden. Cleveland takes Brad Daugherty first overall.
Standard enough.
And then Commissioner Stern steps up. With the second pick in the 1986 NBA draft, the Boston Celtics select Len Bias, University of Maryland.
Must have been incredible. The applause, Bias smiling, shaking hands, putting on that Celtics hat. It was the culmination of everything.
That Auerbach quote really stands out. He'll be the best player on this team within 3 years. High praise, considering who was on that team.
And even Larry Bird was excited about him joining. The best player in the world wanted him there.
The celebration back home in Maryland must have been insane.
Pure euphoria, according to the sources. Family, friends. And there's that really poignant detail about him calling his mom, Dr. Lenise Bias, telling her, I'm going to do great things, Ma.
Ugh, knowing what comes next. That just hits hard.
It really does. So the next day, June 18th, he flies to Boston, meets the team officials, takes that iconic photo holding the Celtics jersey. He looked the part.
And the Reebok deal was basically done too, like huge money.
Yeah, reportedly $1.6 million. Everything's just perfectly falling into place. Career set, finances set.
He gets back to Maryland late that night, June 18th. Wants to celebrate with his friends, back in familiar territory.
Right. Meets up with some buddies, including Brian Tribble and teammates Terry Long and David Gregg. They're at a dorm on campus, Washington Hall.
And they're celebrating, into the early hours of June 19th.
And then,
yeah,
just like that, the celebration stops. The future disappears.
He collapsed right there in the dorm room. Early morning, June 19th.
Total panic. Friends calling 911, frantic, saying something was wrong with Len.
Yeah.
Paramedics get there, find him unconscious, not responding.
They rush him to Leland Memorial Hospital, try everything.
But they couldn't revive him. Attempts to resuscitate failed.
Len Bias was pronounced dead at 8:55 a.m., June 19th, 1986. He was 22 years old.
And the cause of death, determined later. Cardiac arrhythmia brought on by a cocaine overdose. Sources specify it was cocaine he'd snorted hours earlier. It triggered a heart attack.
And this incredibly fit, elite athlete.
Shockwaves. Unimaginable. The whole country, the sports world, the Celtics, Maryland, just stunned. Complete grief. NBA Commissioner David Stern called it the most tragic event to hit the league in its history.
And it's that contrast the sources really drive home. The absolute peak draft day glory, the future wide open, followed hours later by sudden final tragedy, all from one decision.
The immediate fallout was just immense. Media frenzy like you wouldn't believe, headlines everywhere.
First disbelief, then the hospital confirms it, then the cause of death comes out, cocaine intoxication.
And the questions started flying immediately. Who gave him the drugs? Was this the first time? How often? Did Maryland know anything? Were they protecting him or failing him? It shifted so fast. He went from being this symbol of future greatness to, well, a symbol of something else entirely, a cautionary tale. And for some, unfairly maybe, a scapegoat in this larger national conversation about drugs.
The investigation zeroed in pretty quickly on Brian Tribble, right? Since he was there, made the 911 call.
Yeah, he was seen partying with Bias. He ended up facing charges for possession and distribution. The other teammates there, Terry Long and David Gregg, were questioned. They admitted being present, but denied using drugs themselves.
And the toxicology reports back that up.
Correct. The sources are clear. Toxicology confirmed only Bias had cocaine in his system that night.
Meanwhile, the University of Maryland was under a massive microscope.
Or absolutely. That's when the stuff about him skipping classes came out, dozens in his last semester. It blew up into huge questions about academic integrity, about whether the athletic department, the coaches, maybe looked the other way, prioritize basketball over everything else.
And in the middle of all this chaos and grief, his mother, Dr. Len Bias, steps into the spotlight.
With incredible strength and dignity, according to all accounts. She's grieving this unimaginable loss, but she's also calling for accountability, for change. That, quote, we cannot bring Len back, but we can prevent others. So powerful.
Her voice carried weight, and the policy response was incredibly fast.
Shockingly fast. President Reagan, Nancy Reagan, they're mentioning Bias's death publicly. And just 4 months later, October 1986, Congress passes the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. Everyone called it the Len Bias Law.
And this law was significant. Mandatory minimum sentences.
Huge changes. Mandatory minimums for drug offenses, new federal anti-drug programs, and really harsh penalties for distributing drugs that led to someone's death.
But there's a complex side to that law's legacy, isn't there?
Definitely. And the sources we looked at really emphasize this. The law was triggered by Bias's death from powder cocaine. But its harshest impacts, especially those mandatory minimums, fell disproportionately on black communities, largely due to the sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine.
Even though chemically they're similar?
Right. So the law, named after Bias, ended up contributing significantly to mass incarceration, particularly affecting the communities it perhaps wasn't originally focused on in the same way. It's a major point of criticism and a tragic irony highlighted in the sources.
Wow. And back at Maryland, the consequences were also severe.
Immediate and severe. Lefty Drysdale, the legendary coach, forced to resign. The athletic director, Dick Dull, stepped down too. NCAA investigation followed. The whole athletic department basically got overhauled.
The basketball program must have been devastated.
Took years to recover, really. The sources show how Bias's death just ripped open these vulnerabilities, the pressure on athletes, maybe not enough oversight, this dangerous feeling of being untouchable that can sometimes surround star players.
Then came the memorial service, June 23rd, Coalfield House.
Thousands of people showed up. Emotional tributes. Dr. Bias speaking again with such grace. Len was buried with Celtic symbols. That future he never reached. And there's that heartbreaking quote the sources mentioned from a little kid there. He was going to be my hero. He's still my hero.
Just devastating. It's amazing how one event could trigger such massive national policy shifts in institutional reckonings almost overnight.
It really shows the power of a single story, especially when it taps into larger societal anxieties and happens at a particular moment in time.
So thinking about his legacy now, almost 40 years later, the sources often talk about this legacy interrupted.
Yeah, for people who actually saw him play, that memory is still so vivid. The power, the control in the air, the explosiveness, it was unique. And the what-if debate still goes on, especially the comparisons to Jordan.
Because he never played an NBA game, his legacy isn't about stats or rings.
Exactly. It's about that unfulfilled potential, the symbolism, what might have been, and unfortunately how his death was then used.
He became the face of the anti-drug movement in the late 80s, right when the crack epidemic was peaking.
Undeniably. His story was used, very effectively by some, to push for that 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act.
And again, the sources stress the complicated, often negative outcomes of that act. The mass incarceration issue, the racial disparities. It's inseparable from his legacy now.
It truly is a critical perspective the sources provide.
His story also fed into this larger conversation about young black athletes, right? The pressure, the expectations, maybe the lack of real support system.
For sure, that phrase, "don't be the next Len Bias," became common. But sources suggest it was often oversimplified, maybe missing the complexity. Sometimes painted as just a moral failing rather than a tragedy involving circumstance, maybe addiction, maybe just one terrible mistake.
And through it all, his mother, Dr. Len Bias, has been this constant, powerful force.
Absolutely remarkable. She turned that immense personal tragedy into this lifelong mission. Public speaking, mentoring kids, substance abuse education. She always says Len's life wasn't in vain, that his death woke up a nation.
And she faced even more tragedy when her other son, Jay, was killed in 1990.
Unimaginable. And she expanded her advocacy then, talking about gun violence, mentoring, family healing.
Yeah.
Her resilience is just incredible.
Within the NBA itself, how is Bias remembered today?
Still as the ultimate what if. Sources quote legends like Larry Bird saying he was one of the best, and Michael Jordan acknowledging Bias was maybe the only player who could have truly challenged him back then. There's still this deep sense of respect and maybe pain about what was lost.
And we still see his story pop up, right? Documentaries, articles.
Definitely. The ESPN 30 for 30 without Bias was huge. Books, studies, YouTube clips keep his game alive for new generations. People still debate how he'd match up today. There's a real reverence there.
Do the sources suggest his tragedy actually changed things in the NBA?
They do. Today's NBA is different. There are way more resources for mental health, for substance abuse education, for just overall player well-being and protection. Lessons were learned, tragically, from cases like Bias's.
And regionally in the D.C., Maryland area.
Oh, he's still a legend. Players like Jason Tatum, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, guys from that area, they grew up hearing about Len Bias. College coaches still use his story, as this stark reminder of potential and fragility.
The approach to drug education itself has shifted too, hasn't it?
Yeah, thankfully. It's moved somewhat from just say no, fear-based stuff, towards more holistic approaches, talking about mental health, peer pressure, self-worth, underlying trauma. Dr. Len Bias has been a voice in that evolution too.
And there's been a reckoning with the laws passed back then.
A significant one. The role of the 1986 Act in mass incarceration is widely discussed now. There are ongoing efforts to reform sentencing laws from that era. Its complex Bias's death fueled these punitive policies, but now his story is part of the call for reevaluation, for more compassion. Society's understanding has evolved.
It seems like the University of Maryland has also tried to find closure and reconciliation.
Yes, retiring his jersey, number 34, in 2021 felt like a big step, a way to finally honor his contribution, his memory, properly. There's even been talk about a statue someday.
So when you boil it all down, what are the lasting lessons from Len Bias's story?
It's so much more than just one tragic death. It's about the weight of pressure and silence. It's about the need for real prevention and education, not just reaction. It's about that tension between empathy and punishment in society. It's about a mother's incredible strength. And ultimately, it's about the profound impact one life, however short, can have. A powerful reminder, especially for young people, about life, choices, legacy.
The sources kind of leave you with that image, don't they? Forever 22. Frozen right at that moment of unbelievable promise.
Yeah, on the cusp of stardom. Future looked limitless. Time was so short. But the impact, it's still being felt.
Well, you've taken a deep dive into this incredibly complex and heartbreaking story.
We've covered the phenomenal talent, the shocking turn of events, and how his death rippled outwards, changing basketball, changing laws, changing conversations.
And maybe the question that lingers isn't just the simple, what if he had lived?
Right. Maybe it's more about, what have we really learned? What have we learned about nurturing potential, about supporting young people under pressure, about building systems that actually protect and uplift instead of just reacting after tragedy strikes?
Something definitely worth thinking about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.